This is a sports catastrophe production. It's the most wonderful time of the year when the Big Ten and Pac-10 fight with their champions to see who's the best. It is the longest college football bowl game ever. We got stories from a century of Rose Bowl enjoying, and that is all you got to know. There'll be stories of glory, stories of why I even care about the Rose Bowl at all. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Hey there, hi there, ho there. Welcome to this topic video on Friday, January 1st, 2021. Jeff Cutter, Historical Diamond, reporting for Sports Catastrophe. And today's video is basically about the most powerful college football game of all time, bowl game of all time. It's the Rose Bowl. It's one of my favorite moments of New Year's Day. I mean, when you look at it, it's like New Year's Day, oh, you get hungover, you're drinking, you're with friends and all that. Unfortunately, with COVID and all that, I was just by myself, as I always am. So the Rose Bowl game. I'm going to tell you what Wikipedia is telling me. So it's an annual college football game, usually played on January the 1st. Of course, it doesn't always fall on January 1st because if the NFL needs to play on January 1st, or a Sunday, if you will, then the Rose Bowl switches to Monday. So, by the way, in the Los Angeles suburb of Pasadena, California, the Rose Bowl Stadium usually hosts the game. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the game got shifted to Arlington, Texas, because they wanted fans. They wanted families of players to attend the game. It is the highest attended college football game since 1945. It actually started in 1902. That's 119 years ago, which is amazing. I don't think anyone's alive from 1902. That gives you perspective. The first ever game was between Michigan and Stanford, and unfortunately, Michigan crushed Stanford 49-0. So basically, the Rose Bowl directors basically thought, this is going to be embarrassing if we do an East-West football game. So basically, for 14 years, they did chariot races. They did a lot of other weird things, even with ostriches. However, they've decided to play football again in 1916. It's amazing how this bowl game went through 2 world wars, and yet it had to be moved from Pasadena because of COVID. By the way, the Rose Bowl used to be sponsored by Northwestern Mutual, but now Capital One is the main sponsor. So it's a Capital One Rose Bowl game, which sucks because I always refer to the Citrus Bowl, the 1 o'clock football game I usually watch, as the Capital One Bowl. Wow, video games help me out with that. Other sponsors have been Vizio, Citi, PlayStation 2, only once in 2003, and AT&T. Anyway, the Rose Bowl game has traditionally hosted the conference champions for the Big Ten and the Pac-12 conferences, and their predecessors, of course. Since 2002, basically the Rose Bowl game was deviated because of the national championship system. In 2002 and 2006, under the old BCS system, the Rose Bowl was made the national championship game. And basically, the top 2 teams by BCS polls showed, not the Big Ten or Pac-12 champion. Beginning in 2015, the Rose Bowl has been part of the college football playoff as one of the New York Six's bowls, the top 6 major bowl games in the national championship system, hosting a semifinal every 3 years. And when they don't have the college football semifinal, it's the Pac-12/Big Ten matchup. I know the college football playoff doesn't have the championship at the Rose Bowl. It would be somewhere else. As we said, unfortunately, because of COVID, the game moved to Arlington, Texas, or Cowboy Stadium, if you will. Thankfully, though, the Rose Bowl committee said that you can have the Rose Bowl name still for today's game. There's a lot of history and all of that. So yeah, so the Rose Bowl officials, after what Michigan did to Stanford, for 14 years decided not to do football. But they decided in 1916 to have a game. So anyway, yeah, the Rose Bowl Stadium has been around since 1923. Of course, it has been reconfigured several times since its construction in 1922. I mean, obviously, the stadium's almost 100 years old. For many years, the Rose Bowl Stadium actually had the largest capacity in the United States. However, Michigan Stadium in 1998 beat it. I mean, I like Michigan, but like, the maximum seated capacity from 72-97 was 104,594. That's amazing. Capacity got lowered. The 2006 BCS championship game by standards was 93,986. Their official seating capacity is 92,542. And it's the only college football playoff bowl game not held in an NFL stadium. The Rose Bowl is not home to an NFL team. Contrary to popular belief, the Rose Bowl Stadium was never host of an NFL game, even though the LA Rams and LA Raiders played in it. The Raiders would play at LA Memorial Coliseum, aka USC Stadium, and the LA Rams, for a time, when they were in Los Angeles, they played at the Memorial Coliseum, and then they moved into the Rose Bowl. No, sorry, that's UCLA. But the LA Rams, for years, played at Memorial Coliseum, and then in 1980, they moved to the LA suburb of Anaheim to play at Anaheim Stadium. Bet you didn't know that. So anyway, team selection was huge. Between 1916 and 1946, they always pitted a team from the Pacific Coast Conference against somebody from the Eastern United States, not necessarily from the Big Ten. Teams from military bases actually met in the Rose Bowl in 1917 and 18. That's a part of the last 2 years of World War I. There were a lot of big matchups. Notre Dame even played in the Rose Bowl at Pasadena against Stanford in 1925. Alabama even played the Rose Bowl in 1926 against Washington. In 1940, USC took on Tennessee. From 1960 to 1946, 10 times they were undefeated. Each team who came into the game actually had undefeated teams. However, World War II would serve up a big problem. In 1942, because of Pearl Harbor happening in Hawaii, everyone feared that Japan was going to bomb the west coast of the United States. Fair enough. So basically, they wanted to cancel the game. However, Duke University, 9 days after it was in Pearl Harbor, decided, you know what? We're playing Oregon State. Why don't we have it at our stadium? It'll be way far away from the East Coast and all that. And thanks to the Battle of Midway in 1942, Japan was not a threat on the U.S. West Coast, and so the Rose Bowl went back to the Rose Bowl Stadium. So basically, they decided to have conference affiliations, and that was 1946, the Big Nine in the Pac and the PCC, or as we know now as the Big Ten in the Pac-12. So basically, this was huge. In fact, the Big Nine and PCC, Pacific Coast Conference, actually had the same attitude towards desegregation and allowed African Americans to play football. They were the first of the 4 major bowl games, I mean, kind of orange and sugar, to have desegregation and allow African Americans to play. However, the SEC didn't have an African American athlete until 1966. The Cotton Bowl wouldn't be integrated until 1948, the Orange Bowl was 1955, and the Sugar Bowl 1956, for context. So yeah, there were a lot of things. One of the biggest blunders in the Big Ten, Pac-10 era, well, Pac-10 before they expanded to Pac-12 in 2011, is that for a while, it actually had a no repeat rule, which means that if you appeared in the Rose Bowl the previous year, you were ineligible to play in the Rose Bowl the next year. And for many years, conferences would only send one team from their conference to play in bowl games, which is unlikely today, but, you know, things were a whole lot different years ago. So anyway, even though they were the conference champions, Washington in 1960-61 and then Minnesota 61 and 62 actually were exceptions. The Big Ten decided after a problem with Ohio State and Michigan in 1973, they decided to abolish the rule, saying that they would send their conference champion. The Pac-10 actually abandoned that rule prior to 1967. And as I said, both conferences had exclusive agreements with the Rose Bowl game in the sense that member schools were not allowed to play in any other bowl game. However, in 1975, they both abolished it. So basically, Michigan and Michigan became the first Pac-10 team, a Big Ten team, not be conference champion to play in a bowl game, which was the 76 Orange Bowl, and USC actually went to the 75 Liberty Bowl. The Rose Bowl had some interesting games in the Bowl Championship Series era, the BCS era, the pre-college football playoff thing. They actually made team selection for the Rose Bowl was tied to the other three BCS bowls. Although in any given year, the Rose Bowl still attempted to have the Pac-10, Big Ten format. And twice the Rose Bowl was the BCS champion. In 2002, number 1 Miami took on number 2 Nebraska. However, this was kind of controversial, not just because there was no West Coast team playing in the Rose Bowl the first time ever, and it was the first time since 1946 that there wasn't a Pac-10 Big Ten matchup, which was 56 years at that time. It was because number 2 ranked was Nebraska. A lot of people were pissed because Nebraska, in their last regular season game, got blown to smithereens by Colorado at Boulder by a score of 62-36. And Oregon was actually ranked number 2 in the AP and coaches polls. So obviously, people probably would have thought that Oregon would play the Miami Hurricanes. Nebraska didn't even play in the conference championship game because Colorado actually were the best team in one of the Big 12 conferences. So basically, Colorado played. And they would play Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. However, the purists were happy as Miami, who were on their way to a massive winning streak, crushed Nebraska. So Nebraska got karma a bit at them. The other BCS national championship game to be held at the Rose Bowl was 2006 when Texas and USC battled tete-a-tete. It's called one of the greatest Rose Bowl games of all time. Still to this day, like 15 years later. Texas had a 19-game winning streak, and USC had a 34-game winning streak and 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Although one, Reggie Bush, would actually have to give up his Heisman Trophy because of improper recruiting violations. So basically, I actually said, you know what? Texas might be the best chance to knock USC off their perch. Little did I know, I was a fucking genius. But I didn't tell anyone. Texas won by a score of 41-38. And it actually ended up having 35.6 million viewers on TV, which was the highest since the anticipated matchup between number 1 Penn State and number 2 Miami in the 1987 Fiesta Bowl. It was a great game. Vince Young against Matt Leonard. But on 2 other occasions during the BCS era, the Rose Bowl participation expanded beyond the Big Ten and Pac-10. The 2003 Rose Bowl couldn't select Big Ten co-champion Ohio State because they were number 2 in the BCS and had to go to the Fiesta Bowl to play for the national championship. Although it did work out in Ohio State's favor by beating Miami's winning streak. The Rose Bowl decided, you know what, Iowa, Big Ten co-champions, obviously. However, because of order of pick, the Orange Bowl picked Iowa instead, which was angry. There was a Pac-10 team in the Rose Bowl of 2003. It was Washington State, but Oklahoma ended up going to the Rose Bowl. 2005, Texas took on Michigan. It was actually a fantastic game. Like, it went down to the final few seconds. Vince Young did pretty well. And then Vince Young came back in 2006 to sink USC. Of course, a lot of people were angry because they picked Texas instead of California to face Michigan in the Rose Bowl, even though California was a Pac-10 team. And they had BCS computer rankings, though. Would have been nice to see Cal in it. The 2004 game is noteworthy. USC did beat Michigan and got the top rank in the AP, but they had to share the BCS title with LSU. USC couldn't play in the national championship because of their BCS poll ranking. And then the second BCS era Rose Bowl arrangement from 2004 to 2012, the Big Ten and the Pac-12 retained their bids, but a provision was inserted mandating that the first time that either conference could not fill their bid, because obviously a school from the Big Ten or Pac-12 qualifies for the BCS title game, and if a non-BCS conference school qualified, the Rose Bowl had to take that school. As a result, Texas Christian became the first team from a non-automatic qualifying conference to play in the Rose Bowl and the BCS era. The 2010 Horned Frogs were 12-0. Unfortunately, they couldn't play in the BCS title game because they were ranked number 3. TCU did beat Wisconsin 21-19 in a very popular one. The 100th Rose Bowl game is a traditional pairing between the Big Ten and Pac-12, as Michigan State took on Stanford and the Spartans won 24-20. And then the college football playoff system moved in, and a new arrangement was made. As part of this college football playoff agreement, the Rose Bowl game functions as a semifinal playoff game every 3 years. In years that the Rose Bowl doesn't host it, the semifinal, it takes the Pac-10 and Pac-12, and Big Ten champions, unless one or both teams qualify for the semifinals, and then they find another team for the same conference. They never host a final. So basically, the first ever one was 2015. Oregon took on Florida State. It was amazing. Florida State was on this long winning streak with Jameis Winston doing well, and Oregon, quack attack. Seminoles were on a 29-game winning streak, and Oregon crushed Florida State 59-20. I kid you not, 59-20. Oregon went to the national championship, which I believe Alabama won. But anyway, Oregon set the record for most points by one team with 59 that time. Wow. The 2016 Rose Bowl had Stanford versus Iowa, and Stanford crushed Iowa 45-16, scored 35 points in the first half, breaking the record for most points in the first half of the Rose Bowl. And I thought that Stanford was going to break the record for largest winning margin with 49, but it only ended up being 29. And I can't forget that Stanford, first 13 seconds of the game, Christian McCaffrey, on a little bit of a pass from Kevin Hogan, went all the way in the end zone, touchdown. It was like, whoo. However, there was controversy. In that year, because Michigan State did beat Iowa in the Big Ten championship game, but lost to Alabama in the college football semifinal. There was a lot of controversy because Iowa and Ohio State both finished with one loss, but the CFP community said Iowa was ahead of Ohio State, which meant Iowa had to go to the Rose Bowl in 1991. There's since 91. In the 2018 Rose Bowl, Georgia and Oklahoma State played in the semifinal, and Georgia won double overtime, 54-48, which was amazing. The first Rose Bowl game ever to go to overtime. That's amazing. So, of course, as we all know, the city of Pasadena will not have the Rose Bowl. It's in Arlington, Texas, and it was still called the Rose, and still will be called the Rose Bowl. So, yeah. So, television history. The Rose Bowl was first televised on an experimental station outside of Los Angeles, which was KTLA, which becomes KTLA, in 1947. The 1952 game was the first nationally televised bowl game and the first nationally televised college game of any sport, like that all parts of America could see it, if you see it. From 1952 to 1988, the Rose Bowl was televised by NBC at 2 Pacific or 5 Eastern Time, and most years was the only New Year's Day Bowl at that time. 1962 was when the Rose Bowl turned into color. ABC then swiped the rights in 1989 and broadcast it from 89 to 2010. The 2005 edition was the first one broadcast in high-definition TV. In 2007, Fox actually had for a few years the rights to the BCS games. However, the Rose Bowl, who negotiates its own TV contract independent of BCS, agreed to keep it on ABC. So basically, Fox never had the Rose Bowl. And then ESPN decided to get the broadcast rights and all that. And they broadcast all the BCS/college football playoff games, including the Rose Bowl game. ESPN will have the Rose Bowl game at least till 2026. Their contract. And Capital One, even though they are sponsors of the Orange Bowl, they actually are sponsoring two New Year's Bowls, which is weird. All right, so I'm going to give you some stuff. The first ever game was Stanford versus Michigan. Of course, 49-0. Michigan won. So yeah, got some big stuff. Memorable upsets. The first team to actually be ranked number one in the AP poll to be in the Rose Bowl was the 1955, well, the 54-55 Ohio State Buckeyes, who beat USC 20-7. Other number one AP number ones to be in the Rose Bowl. Minnesota went to the 1961 bowl game against Washington and lost 17-7. USC 63 were number one. They beat Wisconsin 42-37 in one of the highest scoring Rose Bowls of that time. In fact, one of the most epic Rose Bowls. Number one, Michigan State went to the 66 Rose Bowl and got shocked by number 5 UCLA 14-12. USC in 68 took down Indiana 14-3, because I'm talking about number one seeds. Ohio State beat USC in the first 1-2 AP matchup in a Rose Bowl in 1969, which was the first NBC one in color. I scored 27-16. 73, USC as number one took down Ohio State 42-17. 76, Ohio State came into the Rose Bowl at number one, but number 11 UCLA with a young Dick Vermeil as head coach beat them 23-10. Ohio State in 1980 were number one coming in, but USC beat them 17-16. Let's see here. One of the most interesting, a lot of people paid good attention to the Rose Bowl in the 1970s for big games. One such big game was Washington taking down Michigan 27-20 in the 1978 Rose Bowl. It was famous because number 13 Washington had a black quarterback by the name Warren Moon, who basically the NFL said couldn't hack it. So Warren Moon went up to the CFL and played 6 years for the Edmonton Eskimos, and then in 1984 the Houston Oilers decided to get him. USC won the 1979 Rose Bowl controversially over Michigan because of a Charles White touchdown that was called, but it should not have been because the ball was not clearly over the goal line. The 1980s, there was some dissidents and all that. 92, Washington, who were hoping to be the national champions, took on Michigan and crushed Michigan in the fine powder, and their Heisman Trophy winner, Desmond Howard. I forget, was it Mario Bailey or who was it who basically said that basically they did the Heisman polls to get it? Howard. They were not named number one. They were co-champs as Miami won their game. Penn State were hoping to be national champs in 1995, but they weren't. Nebraska were. They beat Oregon, though, 38-20. One of the biggest Cinderella stories happened in 1996 when Northwestern, who surprised everyone by winning the Big Ten championship, actually ended up going to the Rose Bowl against USC, but sadly lost 41-32 as Keyshawn Johnson had a career game. The first ever Rose Bowl I watched as a kid, 1997, was when Ohio State beat Arizona State 20-17 on a last-second touchdown by Joe Germain. Number one, Michigan claimed their part of the national championship in 98, taking out Wazoo, or Washington State, with Ryan Leaf, 21-16. There were some interesting ones. All that, so, yeah. No number one team is at the Rose Bowl, I guess under the college football playoff system. It's like, I'm surprised that the Rose Bowl hasn't had the 1-4 matchup. And there are 3 chances. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, Alabama is number 1, number 4 is Notre Dame. So Alabama will be the first number 1 seed since the aforementioned 2006 USC Trojans to be in the Rose Bowl, which is amazing. So, anyway. Seven schools have made 10 appearances in the Rose Bowl in its 119-year history. USC's made 34, Michigan's made 20, Ohio State's made 15, Stanford 15, Washington 15, UCLA 12, and Wisconsin 10. So, that's amazing. So, yeah. Alabama has been to 6 Rose Bowls before this year. This will be number 7. They're 4-1-1. The last time they went to the Rose Bowl was 1946. That's a way long time ago. And Notre Dame's only been to one Rose Bowl in 1925, but that was under the old rule that basically the Pac-10, the Pacific Coast champion, would take on a team from the Eastern United States, not necessarily the Big Ten. So basically, USC 25-9, they're about 500. Wow, that's amazing. Michigan second most appearances, but they're 8-12 lifetime. Ohio State 8-7 lifetime. UCLA, even though they've made 12 appearances in the Rose Bowl, they have not been back to the Rose Bowl since 1999, which is amazing. The Big Ten has a 32-39 mark in the Rose Bowl. The Pac-12 has a 52-44-9 mark. So among Pac-12 and Big Ten schools, the longest active drought is California. They haven't been to one since 1959. That's 62 freaking years. Minnesota, Oregon State, Indiana are next. Come on. Washington State has the longest active drought for winning a Rose Bowl. They haven't won one since 1916. Only 2 head coaches in history, Howard Jones and John Robinson, were undefeated in the Rose Bowl. John Robinson led USC a lot. Howard Jones, most notably for the University of Iowa. And then in the 1920s, he went to USC. The most frequent Rose Bowl matchup is USC-Michigan, happening for the 8th time in 2007. USC with a 6-2 advantage. USC-Ohio State is the second most frequent matchup, with 7 times, with USC having 4-3 lead. Only 2 people have ever started in 4 Rose Bowl games. Archie Griffin, running back for the Ohio State teams in the 1970s, and Brian Cushing, linebacker for USC in the 2000s. Woody Hayes led Ohio State to 4 straight Rose Bowls, and Pete Carroll led them 2006-2009. So I basically, yeah. Current members of the Pac-12 or Big Ten to not be in the Rose Bowl has been Arizona, who joined the Pac-10 in 1978. They have not had a chance, although their neighbors Arizona State have. Colorado and Utah, who both joined the Pac-12 in 2011, haven't been to a Rose Bowl. Maryland and Rutgers have not. They both joined the Big Ten in 2014. Yeah, so the number one seeds have been in 13. 13. This will be number 14, Alabama, and all that. 14th time, and the number 1 seeds have done okay. They are 8-5 headed into this year's matchup. So a lot of game arrangements and all that. Rose Bowl MVPs and all that. Game record. Okay, game records. Famous records. Most points scored by one team. Oregon, 59 in 2015. Most points scored by a losing team. Penn State against USC in 2017, losing 52-49. However, that was not the record for points scored by both teams. That was Georgia, Oklahoma, who narrowly beat that USC-Penn State game. USC-Penn State combined for 101 points. Georgia and Oklahoma combined for 102, although the game went to double overtime. Most points scored in any half. Oregon with 41 in that second half against Florida State in 2015. Most points in a half by both teams. Oregon versus Wisconsin 2012, 56 points combined. Washington was the last team to shut out an opponent in the Rose Bowl, doing that in 1982 against Iowa. Largest margin of victory, Michigan 49-0 over Stanford in 2002, and in 48, Michigan versus USC 49-0. Most touchdowns in a Rose Bowl, Sam Darnold with 5 against Penn State. That passing. Most rushing yards, Charles White 247, in the 1980 Rose Bowl. Neil Snow, most rushing touchdowns. Everyone gave 5 for Michigan against Stanford in 1902. Most passing yards, surprisingly, it's Danny O'Neal of Oregon, who's done it 456 in 1995 against Penn State. Wow. 4 people have 3 sacks in a Rose Bowl game. Kenny Rowe of Oregon was last in 2010. Longest touchdown run, DeAnthony Thomas of Oregon against Wisconsin in 2012, 91 yards. Longest touchdown pass, Rick Leach to Kurt Stevenson for Michigan in 1978, 76 yards. Longest kick return, Al Bush of UCLA, 103 yards in 1947. Punt return, Aramis Dandoy of USC in 1955, classic. The longest interception return was 78 yards by Elmer Layden for Notre Dame in that famous 1925 game. The longest field goal, Rodrigo Blankenship, Georgia versus Oklahoma, 55 yards. They give a lot of Rose Bowl MVP stuff to famous players and all that. So yeah, a lot of Rose Bowl stuff and all that. Rose Bowl. Oh, I gotta see it. I get it. Okay, so it's telling me that there's a Rose Bowl book out there for 100 years. So that, yeah, I'll look at that. Okay, so anyway, the second half of this is basically my involvement in the Rose Bowl. And why should I care? People will go up to me, probably will go up to me and say, Jeff, why are you so interested in the Rose Bowl? It's not Canadian. Canadians don't care about college football. Yeah, right. Hey, TSN draws like 2 to 3 million people every year for that. So, when were you first in love with the Rose Bowl? I'll tell you when. That was in 1997. I was 12 years old, and traditionally CTV would have the Rose Bowl because, you won't really want to see the news on New Year's Day. So basically what they did is CTV got the ABC simulcast and basically broadcast the Rose Bowl game. I always enjoyed watching them. And I was enamored by this long winded history and all that. I got to know a lot of stuff. I got to watch a fair bit of Rose Bowls. Unfortunately, CTV moved away from the college football showing. So basically, I couldn't watch college football unless I could watch it on ABC. And my parents didn't really have cable till 2003. So once we got the cable box and all that, I could watch like ABC and CBS and Fox and all the American stations for the sports and all that. Of course, my mom cut out a lot of the sports channels and all that. But if a regular channel like ABC shows a college football game, I can watch it because, no way to stop it. So anyway, yeah, so for a while, the Rose Bowl was on TSN too as well. So TSN as well. So basically, when I got to Kitchener and had Rogers Cable, which I still do now, TSN would have it. Unfortunately, TSN decided to split off into TSN 1 and TSN 2 back in the 2010s. That meant TSN 2, the lower channel, would have the Rose Bowl game. Sadly, though, that meant that I couldn't get it because it was not part of my cable package. However, in 2015, things changed. TSN split off into 5 different regional channels, which doesn't affect anything except for hockey because I can't watch like Montreal or Ottawa TSN hockey games unless they face the Leafs, which is odd to see that on a TSN. But anyway, yeah, so I get to watch the Rose Bowl without any problems, and nobody cares about me watching the Rose Bowl. So yeah, I was always enamored. I tell you, the 2017-2018 Rose Bowls were epic. 2017, Penn State, USC, great matchup, 2 great schools. All of a sudden, Trace McSorley makes 2 terrible judgment throws. One doesn't get picked off, and then the second one gets picked off, and then USC kicks the winning field goal with no time left. And then Georgia, Oklahoma, it was like Baker Mayfield versus the Georgia 3-headed monster of Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, and crap, I can't remember them. I would say James White, but I'm wrong. But anyway, yeah. And I told my New England Patriot buddies, I said, Sony Michel, when we got Sony Michel in the first round, I said, watch out for this guy. I watched him in the Rose Bowl. He might work. And he kind of has. So anyway, that's the history of the Rose Bowl in a nutshell. I mean, it is what New Year's Day is all about, except that when the NFL does it, and I'm like, fuck. And all that. I know New Year's Day is also the NHL Winter Classic, but because of COVID, it's not this year. So basically, I don't really care about the Winter Classic as much as I should. It's all about the Rose Bowl, baby. And I will have a nice big plate of nachos and a nice big bottle of Pepsi and watch the Rose Bowl because that's my New Year's tradition. Think it for what you think. Anyway, this is Jeff Diamond saying adieu for now.